Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Don Kimmelman. I'm a managing director at the Pew Charitable Trust, which is the parent organization of the Pew Research Center. Pew Research Center's Global Attitude Project was created in 2001 with a mandate to measure public opinion around the world on the big controversial topic of globalization, which was the biggest controversy at that time. Before the first poll could get into the field, however, the attacks of 9/11 happened. The Global Attitudes Project agenda was soon expanded to include attitudes toward Muslim extremism, American leadership on the war on terror, and related issues. Since 2002, Global Attitudes has released 24 reports on a wide range of issues of transnational concern, from globalization to democratization, to China's growing influence, to how Muslims and Westerners view each other. But the project's most widely cited findings have involved the dramatic decline in support for America among key allies and throughout the Muslim world. For better or worse, Global Attitudes has become the de facto scorekeeper on the vital matter of how America is perceived around the world. Andy Kohut, the Pew Research Center's president, has a fresh batch of numbers to share with you today, the results of Global Attitude's first survey since President Obama took office. I think you'll find plenty of interesting material in this rich and comprehensive report. Understanding global public opinion seems essential for any policymaker or concerned citizen trying to make sense of today's increasingly interrelated world. For that reason, the Pew Charitable Trust has been proud to support the Global Attitudes Project since its inception. I want to thank Andy Kohut for his exceptional leadership of this project, and also to express Pew's appreciation to our two eminent co-chairs, Madeleine Albright and John Danforth, for their insights and guidance. Andy will now summarize the findings, and then Secretary Albright and Senator Danforth will provide some analysis. Andy?
Survey in this program that began in 2002. And over the years, we've actually completed more than 200,000 interviews in 55 countries. The poll that we're talking about today is 27,000 interviews in 25 nations. The survey was done May 18 through June 16. Most of these were personal interviews, and they're fairly in-depth. This is not a quick poll. There were phone surveys, however, in North America, Western Europe, and Japan. This poll updates the image of the United States, views about the president, views about American policies that we've been tracking over the years. And of course, this year we also look at, in great depth at how people around the world view Barack Obama. In particular, we examine the impact of his Cairo speech on attitudes in Israel and the Palestinian territories. As subsequent reports in this series will look at Mexico, public opinion in Mexico and public opinion in Pakistan, two troubled countries in some depth, but that's for later. Now to this, what we consider our main survey. As Don noted, we've been one of the principal chroniclers of the rise of anti-Americanism over the past 8 years. But now we're beginning to document a revival of the American image in many parts of the world, reflecting confidence in Barack Obama. In many countries, opinions of the United States are now about as positive as they were at the beginning of the decade before President Bush took office. And that was pretty surprising to me. I'm not at all surprised that Barack Obama is popular. We knew that from the surveys that we had done last year and the other surveys we've seen since. But that this popularity is translated into a change in attitudes toward the United States. The improvements have been most profound. The numbers have moved the most in Western Europe, where having a favorable view of the United States has soared. I'll just give you two key numbers. In Germany, 31% last year said they like the United States. That number was 64% this year. That was the first one to come in, and I thought, wow, the Germans, it's got to be strange. But then the French numbers came in, and it went from 42 to 75, and that was the case in Spain and Britain as well, with really profound changes. But it's not only Western Europe. Opinions of the United States were better in the key countries of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Brazil, for example, from 47 to 61, and Mexico from 47 to 69. I won't read all of these numbers. I'll show some of them to you. The disappointing finding from the point of view of the United States is the needle barely moved in the Muslim public, among the Muslim publics that we questioned. Most Muslims in the survey continue to distrust the United States and disapprove of its policies, the new president notwithstanding. In Turkey, for example, last year we had a 12% favorable rating. That's gone as high now as 14%, which is to say it hasn't moved statistically. On the Palestinian territories, it went from 13 to 15, no change. Similar in Pakistan. There were small gains in Egypt and Jordan, but they were marginal gains. There's really no change in public opinion, no significant change in public opinion about the U.S. The big boost is in Indonesia, where most people, I think 85%, know of Barack Obama's time there, and America's favorable rating went from 37 to 63%. Israel was the only country in the survey, only public of the 25, where the current U.S. rating is lower than it was last year. It's still pretty high, it's 71%, but it was 78% last year. Personal confidence in Obama is fueling this resurgence in most of these countries. Belief that he will do the right thing in foreign affairs is almost universal. The numbers are extraordinarily high. I'll show them to you. In these countries, lack of confidence in President Bush had been endemic. It was pervasive since the war in Iraq, 2003. The gaps, the Obama-Bush gap, are phenomenal. In France and Germany, Obama's ratings are higher than Sarkozy and Angela Merkel's ratings in their own country in terms of having confidence in their conduct of foreign policy. I think it's important to understand one thing that we found from our analysis, and that is views of the U.S. are being driven by personal confidence in Obama, not so much by reactions to the things that he has done, and we asked about those things, or about specific expectations about what he will do. It's in how they see Barack Obama in personal terms, how much belief they have in him. However, even in the Muslim countries I wouldn't say however, but even in Muslim countries where the U.S. remains unpopular, significant percentages of the people that we polled said that they have some confidence in him. In Egypt and Jordan, 42% and 31% respectively. Those are pretty high numbers compared to what we had seen about the way Muslims viewed President Bush over the years. Excuse me. What kind of presentation is this? I move furniture, I drink water, and it's terrible. Look, we did a full survey after Obama's Cairo speech in Israel and the Palestinian territories to see what impact it had on public opinion about the United States and what impact it had in views of Obama. And our conclusion from the data is that it wasn't as transformative as it was written about at the time. U.S. favorability ratings rose only 5% in the Palestinian territory, and Obama's personal ratings also increased only marginally. But what did happen rather dramatically is that favorable views of the United States fell by 13 points before and after in Israel. We did see, however, some signs of progress in terms of Palestinian attitudes that didn't signal weren't part of a sea change, but they give some hope, and that is for the United States. We found many Palestinians after the speech saying they thought Obama would consider their position in the future. That went from like 25% to 39%, a good positive rating. So while the needle didn't move overall, there were some indications that Palestinians heard what Obama was saying, but they weren't quite ready to trust him. One of the most significant things in terms of Muslim attitudes is that for the first time we have more confidence in the American president, albeit modest, than in Osama bin Laden. In the Bush years, larger percentages in many, not all, but many of these countries, or I would say most of these countries, had expressed more confidence in bin Laden than in President Bush. More generally, the poll found broad approval for most of Obama's foreign policies. There was support everywhere for closing Guantanamo and withdrawing troops from Iraq. No surprise there. What was surprising was how little support and how much opposition there was toward about sending more troops to Afghanistan. In every country of the world, save a few, most people said this is not a good idea. That includes the NATO countries. In fact, the NATO countries for the past 2 years have been saying we want our troops out, so it's not surprising that there's lack of support for more troops. Nonetheless, there's very high expectations of Obama. People think he's going to be he's going to seek international approval before using force. He's going to be a multilateralist, and that he's going to convince the United States to take action on climate change. I should add, however, in closing this part of the presentation out, that for all of the positive opinion, problematic perceptions of the United States continue. There are overwhelming numbers of people say that the United States is having a big influence in their country in a general way, and most of these people say, majorities of these people say it's not a good influence. The U.S. is not now seen as acting multilaterally, even though people expect Obama to be multilateral, a bit of a disconnect there. And majorities in 20 of 25 countries believe that the U.S. economy is hurting their own countries. This has not translated into a lower U.S. image as we speculated that it might last year, and that's perhaps one of the dividends of Obama's strong popularity. The most positive sign for the U.S. policy was that there's renewed support among our allies for U.S.-led efforts to combat terrorism. We saw in 2002 a lot of support for U.S. efforts to combat terrorism. After the war in Iraq, it stayed at a very low level. It's gone back up in most of the countries, save the Muslim countries. On some of the other things that we covered in the poll, the global recession is taking quite a toll. Majorities of the publics most publics expressed dissatisfaction with national conditions. This is the second year in a row that people rated their national economy much worse than they did the year before. Economic ratings have soured the most in Europe, Britain, Germany, Spain, Poland, and Russia. And despite this recession, global publics continue to endorse a free market economy. Most continue to say that global trade, not free trade, but global trade is a good thing. And there is not a rejection of capitalism. Large majorities, however, do call for protection against foreign influence, and they would like to see their trade relations, their country protect them in trade relations. And most favor greater restrictions on immigration. Large majorities of the publics in all 25 countries see global warming as a problem. Again, the Americans and the Chinese are less intensely concerned about this than other publics. But even in these hard times, 23 of 25 countries favor environmental protection, even at the expense of slower economic growth and some loss of jobs. What we did find, however, there was more sensitivity on prices. Only 14 of the 25 countries favored taking steps to deal with global climate change if it meant that prices would increase. We did find also little public consensus around the world as to which country is best to take the lead in dealing with the problem of global climate change. At that, this is an enormous report. Well, no, I'm not going to leave it at that. I'm going to show you some numbers. Here's a list of the countries in which we polled. The sample sizes are pretty comparable to what we've done in the past, and as I said, there's about 26,400 interviews, and almost all of them are personal interviews, except in the West. U.S. favorability in Western Europe, as you can see, in France, it's up to 75%, almost as high, if not higher, than it was back in '99, 2000. And the slope of the line is the same everywhere, pretty much, but Spain remains having a less favorable view than the other countries in which we polled. In the Muslim countries, there's relatively little movement. The movement that we see in Lebanon reflects the views of Sunnis, not Shia. I think the difference between Sunni and Shia on this question is 95% versus 2%. It's the biggest gap you will ever see in any country among Muslims. In other countries, there's a great rise in Indonesia from 62% to 37%. Nigeria, also a big increase. In Pakistan, we have a steady 15%. I might add another question in the survey found that 64% of the Pakistanis think the United States is not their partner, but in fact, their enemy. Other countries, modest increases in much of Asia, but the opinions were relatively positive in Asia. They didn't take the dip about the United States, didn't take the dip that they had taken in Western Europe, 70 to 78 in South Korea, 41 to 47 in China. Canada, there's a very big jump. Israel, the decline that I mentioned, but look at the very impressive Mexico, 47 to 69%. Even the Argentinians, who have had a real problem with us since the early part of this decade, went up to 38%. And obviously in Africa, the image of the United States in Kenya and Nigeria is riding pretty high. Here's the Obama-Bush confidence gap. Bush got 14% confidence score in 08. Obama gets 93 in Germany. 13% to 91 in France. We won't belabor the point. The numbers are self-explanatory. There are smaller gaps, however, in Eastern Europe, in Poland and Russia, 41 to 62%, 22 to 37%. The Russians aren't exactly head over heels in love with Obama the way Europeans are. In Muslim countries, there's a noticeable difference between perceptions of Obama and perceptions of Bush, but in relative terms, the numbers are still low. Look down at the bottom, 13 to 37 to 7 versus 13 in Pakistan. And in Israel, the numbers are pretty flat.
Be associated with you in this enterprise. This survey is really a remarkable feat, as I think all of the Pew surveys are. Imagine going to all of these countries and asking all of these people all of these questions. It really is terrific. It's great to be popular. It's wonderful. But I don't see where it gets us. And that's how I read this report. If our goal is, as I think it should be, and as I know Secretary Albright thinks it should be, to have a more multilateral approach in dealing with real problems in the world, including the problem of terror and rogue states, the environment and everything else, I do not understand how this information gives us much encouragement. In fact, I find it somewhat discouraging. I think that the popularity of President Obama and the increased popularity of the United States is a function of a less assertive and more passive approach, particularly to dealing with terror. The survey shows that when we talk about issues, most countries favor our withdrawal from Iraq. They favor our closing down of Guantanamo, and they oppose getting into Afghanistan. So insofar as the position of the United States is more passive, they like that. So far as it is getting more troops in Afghanistan, they don't like that. So I don't quite see where the multilateral cooperation is coming from. 82% of the French respondents say they favor closing Guantanamo. But when the president asks France to take detainees, France agrees to take exactly one person. So I think there's a disjuncture between the popularity of the president and the willingness to step up to multilateral responsibilities to do much. On the question of the environment and global warming, there is widespread view that yes, this is a problem, but 7 of the countries that responded say that while we should do something about it, we shouldn't do something about it if there's a price tag to it. In general, people say in most countries, almost all of them, I think, that they support more international trade. They like international trade. But please, we want government to protect us. So I don't see the growth in popularity as translating into anything that's real. And I think that it is important to try to have a more cooperative approach with other countries in dealing with these problems, but that must mean that they cooperate. Now, one of the questions in the survey asks about following America's lead in combating terrorism, and most people said yes, we would follow America's lead. But it seems to me that the meaning of that is we'll follow America's lead insofar as America doesn't really want to do much. And we hope that our country is more assertive in dealing with terror, but to do what? So that is my general reflection on this survey. I think that the goal of America should be to try to have a concerted effort in dealing with real problems, and I don't see in this information a willingness to deal with real problems.
Leaders or non-governmental organizations or various groups of people abroad, there is just a great sense of anticipation and admiration for President Obama and a way of viewing America differently. And so I do think that it's always good to get the numbers to support that. I think that what we do need to understand, however, is that there is a increasingly complicated international situation, that there are issues out there that have never been dealt with before, issues that require a different approach, a different way of looking at what America can do, whether the multilateral institutions work, how they can work. So whoever would have been President of the United States at this time was going to be operating in a very, very difficult situation. Some might describe it as chaotic, and some might just describe it as challenging, but it clearly is very complicated. There are also remnants still of having had a different president for 8 years, and I do think that these numbers show it, that the U.S. had really fallen into a pretty deep hole, that we were not respected internationally, and in some cases we were feared. I think that the earlier surveys show that. The popularity of President Obama is really something that is across the board. The numbers differ a little bit, but it really is pretty remarkable. And so the question is, so what? I mean, it is very nice to have a president who's very popular, but as somebody who has been and continues to be interested in U.S. national interest, I believe that his personal popularity and the kind of new respect for the United States for having elected him, I think translates positively for our national interests. If you think about the issues that are out there that have to be dealt with, whether they are issues of how to fight terrorism, nuclear proliferation, dealing with the economic issues, looking at energy, environment, those kinds of issues that cannot be dealt with by one country alone. Having a president who is viewed as somebody who wants to use multilateral tools, wants to reach out, is respectful of other countries' interests, is something that, in fact, I think is very important and does redound well to U.S. national security interest. I think that there is no question that there is kind of an ambivalence about the United States. I think people in other countries want us to lead and yet are a little concerned about how we lead. That I think, ever has it been thus. I mean, we are the most powerful country in the world. But I do think that these new numbers on President Obama mitigate some of that concern, especially given his approach. He goes into countries, he meets with the leaders, he has town hall meetings, he is approachable to the extent any American president can mix and mingle. And so I think that helps us a lot. I do think that he's done some very smart things in terms of that play well to this popularity. I mean, he has put together a team that also reaches out. And he does, in fact, listen to what people have to say and is, this is my term, I think, an inspired truth teller in terms of what the United States might have done wrong in the past, but willing to change, and also uses that then in a way to say, well, you in X country haven't exactly done the right thing either. So I think that he has a way of approaching that. I think that it is going to be interesting to see what happens with this amazing set of numbers for a particular American president, and how he translates his personal support and popularity into dealing with these particular issues. But I personally would prefer to see an American president with these kinds of numbers to the ones that were there previously, and it offers huge opportunities. Is commenting on are actually what I had mentioned as part of remnants of past policies. They're really, the reason that they are glad that we've closed Guantanamo is that Guantanamo was part of what undermined America's capability and reputation. And that the way that the past administration had fought terrorism, this is my personal belief, created more terrorists. Even Secretary Rumsfeld agreed to that. So I think that what I find that is important here is that there is a different view of American leadership and of Americans for having elected this particular president, which I think still does need to be translated. There's no question about that. But we are on a better glide path to restoring our reputation and our leadership than we were for the previous 8 years.
I would just add one thing. While I agree with Senator Danforth that there is a wariness of American assertiveness, I don't think that you can discount the importance of Obama's popularity. Because if and when we get to a new policy as opposed to old policies which have a lot of baggage and were very unpopular, what Obama's popularity will do and the better view of the United States will do, will it allow people to at least listen and consider. If we were dealing with a president whose favorable ratings were 21% rather than 60%, you wouldn't even get that audience, and there would be so much pressure to not go along publicly that it at least gives the United States and this administration an ability to be heard, very unlike what we saw in 2002 and early 2003, where the reactions to that administration were so negative that there was real public backlash.
I don't want to just preempt it with the three of us talking, but I just, I mean, I think the president is being heard. He's telling people what they want to hear. He's apologizing. He's saying that we will get out of Iraq and close down Guantanamo, but when he does ask for something, I don't see that he gets anything. And I mean, he hasn't been at it very long, and really there are only three questions here that I'm pointing to. One is Iraq, one is Afghanistan, one is Guantanamo. Maybe there are other questions that could be asked in other surveys. Maybe there are other things that we could ask the people of the world, or at least of some of the countries of the world, to help us with. But I don't see any indication in this that anybody is willing to pay any price and bear any burden for much of anything.
Is to Americans that they are viewed more favorably in the world? Does it make a difference to them?
To whom are you addressing that question?
Well, perhaps you could address it first, and perhaps Secretary Albright from her travels. Whoever feels like they'd like to comment.
Well, we've seen for some time the United States feeling that restoring America's close relationships between the U.S. and allies was a very important foreign policy goal. This can only, I think, can only be seen as good news to most Americans. I might add that Barack Obama's approval ratings with regard to foreign policy at this point are markedly higher than his approval ratings with respect to most domestic policies, and this is probably part of that.
You know, I do think that people prefer to be viewed positively and be popular. I think that we are going to have to see how this is translated into real things on the ground. When Americans feel more secure, but I think a lot of Americans understand the extent to which our fate is tied to that of other countries, and that therefore, as we get into more partnerships and cooperation, people will see that positively. Ultimately, though, as any country, people care about what's going on domestically.
Senator Danforth, you want to respond to that?
Well, it's nice to be popular. Everybody likes to be popular. And we want our country to be popular. And I think we like it when, you know, when the president, or then still Senator Obama, makes a speech in Germany, and there are hundreds of thousands or millions, whatever the number was, of people listening. That's terrific. You'd rather have people cheer you than throw eggs at you. But I think this gets beyond feeling. I mean, take Guantanamo. I mean, maybe it made us unpopular today, and surely it did. I'm sure Guantanamo is unpopular. But what are we supposed to do with these people? I mean, do we just let them go? And so where's the help from the rest of the world? Where are people? They're not going to take them. So that's my whole point. I mean, it's not that the popularity is bad, it's wonderful. But where do we go from here? And if the popularity is based more on a more passive and less assertive approach, then what do we do in the real world of terror and rogue states?
There's a question back here. Tell us your name and to whom you're addressing the question.
My name is Madeleine. I'm with the South African Broadcasting Corporation. I want to ask just one quick question, but just a very small comment about the president's popularity. I mean, I agree with you totally. He's very popular where I come from. His speech in Ghana, for instance, you know, he touched very important issues, but unfortunately, you know, he was preaching to the people who are already converted. I mean, it didn't go in the grassroots. I mean, some of the people in South Africa, Mozambique, and Mauritius, where I was, don't even know he was in Ghana. I suppose it's because of the media, the accessibility.
Try to bring the question to a point. We got a lot of people here.
Yeah.
What is your question?
And my question is, I see that his popularity in the two countries in Africa you researched, that is his hometown in Kenya and Nigeria, the most popular, are very high. Did you find out, because I'm not sure if, like in Germany and France, he might be more popular than the leaders there?
We did not do that. We hope in future surveys to broaden our coverage of Africa, and periodically we've done as many as 15 African countries. And we did not compare Obama's popularity to the popularity of the leadership of these countries as we did in Western Europe. But again, we're going to do a lot more research in Africa and other places over time. Thank you. Right here.
Thanks. Andrei Sita from TASS from Russia. My question is for Secretary Albright. Madam Secretary, how do you explain the lingering doubts, the lingering concerns in Russia and in the US about Russia, which is also in the survey? And what does it tell you about the future of our relations, especially in the effort to reset the relationship? And also, if you could, I apologize, this is a sort of a parochial question, but my broader question is, can you explain to us what is your view of the new approach of Secretary Clinton, who now describes a quote-unquote multi-partner world as opposed to the multipolar world? Thank you.
On the issue of U.S.-Russia relations, I think that, again, you can't snap your fingers and have something be totally different. We have had a very long adversarial relationship with Russia throughout the Cold War, and there was a real attempt in the 90s to change that and to have a respectful interaction with the Russians. What I have seen in my own dealings is that there is a lack of trust between the U.S. and Russia for a number of different reasons, and that when President Obama and Vice President Biden have spoken about the reset, it is in order to develop, I think, a pragmatic relationship between two very important countries. I think that it is true in at least what I've seen of Russian polling is that basically the younger generation in Russia is actually quite distrustful of the United States. And I also think that President Obama's approach when he was in Moscow was one in which he did what he does in other countries. I mean, he tells it like it is. And his appearance at the New Economic School, I think, explained where he wanted the relationship to go. And yet now there are going to be some very practical effects. The question is how the strategic arms control talks will go, what the relationship is going to be on NATO-Russia, and at the same time reaching out, wanting to work with Russia, but also making clear that we don't believe in spheres of interest. And so I think there's going to be, on both sides, a very practical and pragmatic approach, cooperating where we can. On the Secretary Clinton question, I think that this has to do with the way that the United States believes that we should be operating in the 21st century, that there are issues that cannot be dealt with by any country by itself, and that partnerships are needed, and that this is not, the way Secretary Clinton put it, we are not in the 19th century of a concert of powers, and we are not in the 20th century of a balance of powers, which kind of is the multipolar view, much more in terms of multi-partnerships where there has to be cooperation in order to resolve global warming or nuclear proliferation or world hunger. And it's a very practical approach, and that's the way I see it, and that's why these numbers in terms of President Obama's popularity, when people know that he is into a multilateral approach is useful. And I would just make the following statement, is we have to remember it is July 23rd. He has been in office 6 months and 2 days. And has, I think that there is no way that one can undo the effects of the last 8 years that quickly, and that the reason that I'm encouraged, one is I'm an optimist, is that basically it provides a great basis for changing. It is not, you know, when we do this again in 8 years, we'll see where we are. But I think that at the moment, this is a very encouraging set of numbers with some warning signs that are out there that need to be considered. I think the Afghan issue and the lack of support for that is something that obviously has to be taken into account.
Anything in your research that suggests the sustainability of President Obama's personal popularity, or maybe he's enjoying a honeymoon period on the world stage similar to the one that he's enjoyed at home?
No, there's nothing here that gives an indication of what the future will hold. I think the one thing that would argue that these numbers are pretty robust, or opinions about him are pretty robust, is how consistently positive people are, and the way his personal approval ratings and confidence in him has translated into changed opinions about the United States. That would argue that this is a pretty powerful set of perceptions, which isn't to say that they're not going to change. We just can't. We just can't predict the future. It's very much like opinions about him domestically. His approval ratings continue, strong overall approval ratings continue, even in the face of declining approval ratings with regard to specific issues. But you know, there's no magic formula in this survey that says, well, he can take 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits, but the numbers are pretty strong, and they're pretty consistently strong internally. Yeah.
Mitch Pollard with the Toronto Star newspaper. I'm just curious to know if the panelists think, is there a point where you're too popular internationally? Is there any downside domestically to Barack Obama in some of the nearly stratospheric numbers we see in Western Europe, which, unless I'm misreading them, seem to suggest he's more popular there than he is in his overall approval ratings here in the United States?
Well, given the fact that the public has long saw an important objective of American foreign policy to restore the image of the United States all around the world, I don't think in a general sense you can expect that there's a lot of danger here, and also the fact that his foreign affairs ratings are even better than his domestic ratings. I'm sure, though, that some of the strong critics of the Obama administration will say, there, see, but that's not a widespread point of view. Any other comment?
I think that people, I know Senator Danforth will say it's nice to be popular. It is nice to be popular. And I think that people feel better if we are liked. You know, Americans now don't have to say they're from Canada when they travel around. But the bottom line is, ultimately, he will be judged a lot on how much attention he pays to domestic policy. And so I think that that is important, and the two go together. And a lot of the issues that are domestic policy issues, such as energy, ultimately have a foreign policy dimension, but they go together.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's nice to be popular. I think President Obama is an enormously attractive person and a very, very gifted politician, very, very able. I think that most Americans, for now, like the idea of our president being popular in the world, and like the idea of our country being better thought of in the world. However, the number one responsibility of President Obama is to protect the people of the United States in a very dangerous world. And the ultimate question is going to be, how effectively is he doing that? And what steps is he taking? And how able is he to garner support from other countries to help us in that effort? Those are going to be the ultimate questions. And if he's gaining international popularity by telling people what they want to hear, and by getting very little in return, and by taking kind of an apologetic approach for the United States, I think people are going to really judge him ultimately on, okay, are we safer because of this, or are we less safe because of this?
Because you've now said this a couple of times, Senator, and I have to dispute this. I think when he makes speeches abroad, he does something that I think is quite brilliant, which is to accept some responsibility for past actions that have been wrong, and then say, okay, I have said that we did this wrong, but you did something wrong too. And it allows him to be able to get at the point that others have responsibility for that particular action. I think it is a lot of things that people do in their lives because I think the U.S. did do some things wrong. And the sign of a really great country and a great leader is to say, we didn't do this right, instead of saying everything we've done is brilliant. So I don't accept the fact that he goes abroad to apologize. He goes abroad and tells the truth, and I think that's very important.
In the back there.
Rima Hamdiya with Russia Today News, the Arabic service. The higher ratings of Obama and the U.S. administration in general translates, in the Muslim world, translates into a drop in Israel. This sounds like a hard game to play. How do you think Obama is going to go about it?
Whom would you like to address that question to?
Well, I think that what President Obama has said, and is evident in the work of Senator Mitchell, is that the United States is going to have a much more active role in trying to bring about the Israeli Palestinian peace process, and to not kind of, I think there was a very interesting roadmap that President Bush put out, but they never took it out of the glove compartment. And so the bottom line is that President Obama and Senator Mitchell and Secretary Clinton are going to be much more actively involved. What happened is that President Obama, and it goes to the point of his speeches, in Cairo, he gave a very important speech in which he made clear what we needed to do vis-a-vis the Muslim world, that the Muslim world, by the way, I hate that term because it's not monolithic, but I think that that things that had to happen. He also made clear about the freezing of the settlements, and so he is pointing out that the role the U.S. can play is to bring the parties together on a very, very difficult set of issues.
One last question here.
Hi, Amanda DeBard with the Washington Times. Could you put the environmental data into perspective as far as moving forward with international climate discussions?
To whom are you?
No, I think you.
Well, I think what this survey shows is that there's a good deal of support for dealing with the environment and dealing with global climate change specifically. I was surprised that the numbers did not decline markedly when we asked people about taking steps to protect the environment, even if it leads to less economic growth and some job loss. Those numbers held up pretty well at a time when people are very concerned about jobs and very concerned about their economies. There was more concern about prices, and so that's obviously one of the pressure points in consideration of policy, and whether people will see dealing with global climate change is something that's going to drive up their prices at a time in which their currencies, dollars or whatever their currencies, are very stretched. Certainly, the expectation that the United States is going to take steps to deal with this issue is very clearly apparent, both around the world and even to a certain extent in the United States, or to a fair degree in the United States.